দর্শক আমন্ত্রণ জানাচ্ছি চ্যানেল 24 এর নিয়মিত আয়োজন মুখোমুখিতে প্রতি পর্বে আমাদের সাথে একজন করে বিশেষ অতিথি থাকে, সেখানে আমরা কথা বলি সেই বিশেষ অতিথির সাথে। আজকে আমাদের সাথে আছে ঢাকার ইউরোপীয় ইউনিয়নের ডেলিগেশন প্রধান চার্লস হোয়াইটলি। ওয়েলকাম টু দ্য শো।
Thank you.
How are you?
Very good, thanks. How are you?
I'm good, and good to see you too.
You too.
Yeah, so it's been 50 years EU-Bangladesh relationship. What was the challenge, how it's been achieved, and what you are looking at for next 50 years?
Well, I'm first of all pleased that our relationship is moving so rapidly ahead in so many fields. You know, so we've had a traditional relationship for many years of a development partner, and now I think we're really becoming a partner to Bangladesh. So we see changes across the board, whether it be trade, whether it be political dialogue. As you know, we launched a political dialogue with Bangladesh last year, whether it be engagement on issues like maritime governance or climate change. So it's a very interesting time for our relations, and I think the next few years will be especially interesting as we negotiate a new partnership agreement. So that's a very good opportunity to make sure that our relations are fit for purpose. And these partnership agreements are very wide-ranging, so that will be the case with Bangladesh. And also as we launch closer cooperation on trade and investment issues, for example, through the new European Chamber for Commerce. So I'm very pleased to sort of capture our relationship in three key words. And I did this for Europe Day on May the 9th, where we celebrated our 50th anniversary. And I think you can capture it with the words prosperity, friendship and values, friendship, prosperity and values, bondutto, sombridi and mulabot.
That's right.
And these are very key aspects of the relationship, and all three are very important. And we will build on these three principles as our relationship develops.
Right. So you were here in 2008-9, if I'm not wrong. So you have seen now it's 20. You came back on 2022.
Yes, 21.
21. Yeah. So in between these years, what are the changes you have really seen in Bangladesh?
Well, I think the changes are remarkable. You know, we've seen huge economic growth, and Bangladesh, you know, is now a major emerging economy. I think, you know, as Bangladesh works its way towards becoming a developing country and leaves least developed status behind,
right,
that demonstrates the economic progress that's been made and the social progress. So, of course, key human development indicators have progressed enormously since 10 to 15 years ago. But that work continues, and I think it's always important to remember that there are people who are left behind in any developing society. And we, for example, in the European Union will continue providing development assistance for those people who are left behind in partnership with the government and civil society. I was very pleased to be present at a launch for the next phase of our program to support the extreme poor in Bangladesh yesterday. And that's key. You know, for the sustainable development goals, the mantra is leave no one behind. So you see this progress, you see the economic progress, the social progress, but of course you should never forget there are those who aren't sharing in the new prosperity, and it's important that we all also focus on those people.
Right. So this economic prosperity, this growth needs a strong political will, which comes by strong political leadership. And obviously that is selected by the mass people by vote. So how do you see the whole scenario of the coming up election?
Well, election is a very important part of the life of any nation and of any democracy. And I think everybody, from the rickshaw waller in the street to the richest businessman, wants to see a free and fair election in Bangladesh, and to make sure the conditions are there so that everybody can participate, and that there's a genuine choice in the elections. So we, as I said, values is one of the three core principles of our relationship with Bangladesh, and we've engaged on these issues for years as partners and as an international friend of this country. So I think, you know, we're very happy that international observers will be invited to observe the elections, and as you know, we will have an exploratory mission coming, an election observation mission coming in July to make a first assessment of how we deploy a full observation mission. And I think the EU has a good reputation globally for how it deploys observation missions. It's very professional. It's linked to measuring any election around the world against international standards. And we ourselves, in our own elections in Europe, have the same measurement of whether it meets standards. For example, the OSCE often observes elections in European countries, and that's part and parcel of being an open democracy. So, as I said, we're very happy that the door is open to observers, and we will certainly hope to deploy a full observation mission well ahead of the parliamentary elections.
Okay, in July, any particular date been fixed when they're coming?
Yes, it's beginning and deploys on 8th of July for several weeks because it's necessary to talk to all stakeholders, whether that be people in government, the political parties, media, civil society, because the exploratory mission really takes the temperature of the whole system. It's not just about, how many ballot boxes there are on ballot day, are they transparent, is there, what is the election apparatus? It's also about the surrounding conditions for an election, in terms of media, in terms of civil society engagement, voter awareness, and that's part and parcel of the methods of our election observation. So it's not focused entirely on election day, it's focused on the surrounding environment and process.
Environment and process, okay. Do they follow any particular guidelines? I mean, do EU have any particular guidelines?
Yes, we have very detailed international guidelines that are based on international UN standards. They're available online, and it's a very transparent process. Of course, we rely on an invitation, and we've received that invitation from the authorities.
Right.
But it's done very much as a positive thing. It's done as a way of also saying, perhaps changes can be made in certain areas, and that's all after the elections, of course. But the idea is to develop the partnership further and work on, all of us need to improve our democratic systems, and I think it's a very positive engagement.
Right. In this case, as we have seen in 2014 and 2018, there were no election observers because you said it was not participatory and there was violence. So obviously you expect the next election without violence and participatory, right? And there is a commitment from the government, and the top of the government says the next election will be free and fair. So how do you see this whole thing, and how much you really trust these words?
Oh, it's not for me to judge the words, but I think, as I said, everybody wants to see free and fair elections. Of course, it's important that the atmospherics are right, and it's up to the parties also to decide what they do, whether they participate, how they participate. I think choice is a key thing in an election, a genuine choice, of policies, and it's important there's a political and policy debate ahead of an election, so voters can make an informed judgment, and I think that applies to any
Do you mean by policy debate is like dialogue?
No, I mean discussions about policy priorities for the next government, whoever that government, whichever government.
Between all the parties or among the parties?
No, it's part of the society's debate. So people reading the newspaper, they want to know. I think everybody in every country now tires of political conflict.
Yes.
It's the same in Europe. We have some parties who are from a more extreme angle.
Yes.
People want good management of government in any country, but they also want to know what are the policy priorities. And I think in any good election, you see parties putting forward their policy priorities, people in the street saying, well, I'm attracted to this idea or that idea. Right. And that's a good...
The manifesto should be clear enough.
Absolutely, yeah.
Right. So you also had a meeting with different political parties, and as a diplomat, you are entitled to do so. Do you find any... among the discussion, out of the discussion, did you find any mistrust among them?
Well, I think you know the answer to your own question. I think clearly the parties are not in a position of trust. They are, we would encourage always discussion amongst all political parties, but there are clearly, now there are different demands from different political parties about what they want to see as a precursor to participating in the election. And all we can do as outside friends of Bangladesh is encourage dialogue amongst those parties. So I think we all, in all our systems, think dialogue is the best way forward.
That is also, I believe. Yeah. So we've been talked a lot of election. On this issue, I have a last question to ask you. I think we had done enough. My question is, as you come to know that USA has came up with a decision on a visa policy that whoever will rig the vote or whatever the manipulation is during the election, and for the betterment of democracy, they will restrict their visa. It may be government officer, any political party people, anybody who are linked with, and along with their family members. I'm not sure, but EU and USA is good friends. They follow each other policy. We have seen that in Burma cases and Russian cases. In that particularly, will Brussels follow this Washington decision? If not, why is that?
I mean, clearly it's a very important announcement that the US has made, and the motivation for the announcement is very clear. It's a policy statement, and they've said that this is about encouraging free and fair elections, which, as we've said, everybody wants. So I think it set out, as you say, a clear list of issues that would trigger action under these new measures, regardless of what party or institution an individual belongs to. So it's a very significant announcement. I think from the EU side, our policy mix is different. We are focusing on our election observation mission. We're focusing on engaging with the political parties. Of course, we discuss with our like-minded colleagues like the US and others all issues relating to our engagement with Bangladesh. But the EU is not the US. We have our own policy mix. And we'll be taking that forward in the months ahead of the election, which includes the observation mission, a substantial observation mission.
Right. So moving forward to the next issue, that is GSP plus. Bangladesh is one of those countries who enjoy GSP from EU. So what are the really important measures Bangladesh need to fulfill in GSP plus?
First of all, it's always important to remember how well Bangladesh has made use of the existing trade regime, duty-free and quota-free access. Last year, exports from Bangladesh went up 50% to the European Union. And I just read this morning that Bangladesh is now once again the largest exporter of garments to the European Union market. So this is a situation that we all welcome in terms of the importance that we attach to having good quality garments from the Bangladesh market. And I think it's a situation where we all realize that the transition to GSP Plus has to be managed in a careful way because we need to be mindful of the fact that the garments industry employs hundreds of thousands of people, including many women, and that it's a very large part of the export market of Bangladesh. Nobody wants to disrupt this, but there are ways of encouraging, for example, trade diversification, and that's an important point. And again, moving to GSP Plus in a predictable, managed way is a priority for all of us. But to do that, we need to maintain the focus on implementing the 32 conventions that are part of the conditions for joining GSP Plus. They are environmental, social, labour, human rights standards. And Bangladesh is not yet at the stage where we engage on following whether those conventions are being implemented sufficiently. That will happen later in the process. But the more we prepare now and the more Bangladesh prepares now for that system, the better. And I think I see encouraging signs. And for example, if the elections go well this year, that will send a really positive signal in terms of the country's readiness.
How is that related?
Because in the conventions, there's the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. And the ICCPR, which is one of the 32 key conventions for GSP+, stipulates that there should be certain levels of political freedom and so on in a country. And that's an important aspect of civil and political rights.
Okay, I get it. And what about the labor standard, freedom of association, freedom of labor movement? Do you think that went up to the standard?
Well, it's a process, and I think there's been some very positive movement. We have the National Action Plan on the labour sector that the EU agreed with Bangladesh. It's a very detailed action plan. It has many, many recommendations that are time-bound. There's been a little bit of slippage in terms of fulfilling on time some of those requirements, but the momentum is still there. And we see, for example, that there will be progress on the labour laws soon. There is the commitment from the government to abolish child labour by 2025. And it's not just about the EU or other partners saying you have to do this, that and the other. Bangladesh has decided for itself that it's important to improve these standards because it's important also, not just because it's the right thing to do, but because it places Bangladesh in a stronger position for exporting to markets like the EU. For consumers who look at these issues and say, it's great if I can buy a T-shirt at a reasonable price from Bangladesh and be assured that it wasn't produced in the wrong way. It's produced with compliance. And I think it's very encouraging that we've had this long-term engagement from the government and the authorities on fulfilling these standards. And that, again, helps very well with meeting the GSP Plus conditions. So that's a very positive trajectory, but where further progress is obviously still needed. And what I wanted to say is, You know, we're not there saying you should do this, you should do that only. We are also funding and
Yes.
supporting this process through our Decent Work Team Europe initiative. And that's important because, you know, it's important to support with resources as well as words. And I think we're doing both as European Union.
We've been talked about politics, election observation team, labor rights, GST Plus, and RMG. Let's look at the Ukraine issue. So this issue is really getting critical, and critical. And I would say your fight, Russians' fight, making us sufferer. I mean to say Bangladesh. But how long this will go on? Because it doesn't help anyone.
Well, first of all, it's important to be clear about what's happened. Russia has invaded a sovereign country, violated the territorial integrity of that country, violated the UN Charter. They've sent 8 million people fleeing as refugees to the rest of Europe. There have been over 20,000 civilian casualties as a result of the Russian aggression. So it's important to remember who the primary victims of this war are. But then there are, of course, secondary victims, as you say. Secondary victims like the people of Bangladesh, who are now facing extra costs and expenses and a more complicated world to do business in. Nobody wants that. We as European Union, as the largest trading bloc in the world, we are the last people who want to see this kind of disruption and bloodshed on our continent that has worldwide implications. And I think I'm not the right person to ask when can this end, because there's only one person that can answer that question, and that person sits in Russia. And they can stop this conflict and aggression tomorrow if they want, and come back into compliance with international law and acknowledge that the territory they've taken from a sovereign country should be returned. So we want the war to end as soon as possible, but at the moment, unfortunately, I don't see any signs of the political willingness on the Russian side to take the steps necessary to bring peace back to Europe and to bring the kind of resolution of the unfortunate impact of this aggression on the people of Bangladesh and many other people around the world.
Right. So do you think it's his ego that he's losing it?
Well, I'm not a psychiatrist. I have no idea. I
What do you sense?
Well, I'm also not a Russian expert. I'm sitting in Bangladesh as a representative of the EU to Bangladesh. So I wouldn't like to delve too far into the psychodynamics of this aggression. But I'm pretty sure the Russian people who, let's remember, tens of thousands of Russian soldiers have paid the ultimate price for this war. And I'm pretty sure that they too would like to see peace and an end to the bloodshed. So it's down to the leadership to make that a reality.
Do you think your alliance like US, UK taking it further?
Well, I'm European Union again, but I think the European Union has stood in solidarity with Ukraine. We have a border with Ukraine as European Union. They're our neighbours. And we've taken a huge share of the refugees who've been forced out of their homeland. So we want peace. We want peace, but we also want Ukraine to remain a sovereign, independent country with territorial integrity. We want international law to be preserved. And I have to say, we were very heartened by the kind of language that Bangladesh spoke in the context of their recent meeting in Japan, where there was an emphasis on international law, territorial integrity, and so forth. This is very important because Bangladesh has always stood on the side of international law in the UN. I've worked in the UN for 4 years, and this is a position of principle. And when you apply it to these facts, and of course there are other conflicts around the world that you can talk about, but when you apply the principles to the facts of this aggression, the only conclusion is that it's wrong and it's in violation of the law. So I think I want to see peace, but at the moment we are standing in solidarity with Ukraine as a country that's now been given the prospect of joining the European Union in a few years' time.
Okay. Let's talk about EU-Iran negotiations on denuclearization. So do you think, as EU is discussing for quite some time with Iran, it's quite interesting for me, and I'd like to learn that if that really takes a good success, how that could really have an impact on the world?
Well, I think clearly could have an impact on the world. I mean, we're all looking for a world that's more stable. Nuclear proliferation is a frightening phenomenon, and it's one that should be contained. And one thing that we're concerned at in the European Union is the sort of pulling back from the international conventions and agreements that have regulated to some degree proliferation, of course not entirely, because although nuclear weapons are the ultimate weapon.
Yes.
No one wants to see them used. So any agreement that could ensure that people can develop civilian nuclear power, which is a perfectly legitimate pursuit, and we see that in Bangladesh as well with the Rupur nuclear plant. That's a perfectly acceptable use of nuclear technology. Any agreement that can foresee that happening without the danger of nuclear proliferation and war is a good thing. And the EU has a long history through our role in the negotiations, P5+1 negotiations, a long history of trying to bring about an agreement that will hold and that will deliver both what the Iranians would want in terms of nuclear civilian power and what we and many in the wider world would want, which is a world without nuclear proliferation.
Okay, let's talk about the Rohingya issue. It's really getting more trouble in the camps, not just because we see a lot of terrorism activities, but it's also the UN is running out of funds. Okay, how this can be managed in coming days? It's getting tougher, right?
You're absolutely right, and I think we expect and we're told by the UN that on the 1st of June the rations will be cut further to $8 per refugee per month. That's a very difficult situation, and over 1 million refugees have been cared for the last 5 years, and it's important that the services and the food and the help that they need continues to be delivered, but the needs are staying or growing, and as those needs grow, we need to look wider in the international community for funding and support. And the EU has maintained our level of funding. We've provided about 400 million euros since the crisis began. Others have done tremendous work in supporting the UN and civil society to support the refugees. But now I think there's hope that others, what we call non-traditional donors, hope that they might also further intensify their support to the Rohingya. And that's important because at the moment, unfortunately, we don't see any political solution to this crisis. And we stand shoulder to shoulder.
What about Chinese stand?
Well, China is doing what they're doing and pursuing various attempts and efforts in terms of repatriation and other initiatives. From our point of view, we see the need for the Myanmar regime to reverse its human rights violations, to create a country that is ready to welcome back the Rohingya. That means that human rights are respected, that the Rohingya and other minorities in that country are safe. And at the moment, as far as we can see, that isn't the case. There remain, huge problems with human rights. So we want to keep the pressure up on the Myanmar side. We want to see the situation improve. But we don't want the Rohingyas to pay any price for any uncertainty in this regard.
Right. My last question, how the new migration policy will benefit, the EU new migration policy will benefit Bangladesh?
Well, I think first of all we have to put it in the context of where we're at with migration in the EU. I mean, we've had years of illegal migration into the European Union. Over 600,000 people have been rescued from the Mediterranean Sea since 2015. 600,000 people from EU operations in the sea. Over 60,000 people have perished in that time. So this is a terrible scenario for people who, for the best of reasons maybe, are trying to get to Europe to make a life for themselves, but they can't do that illegally. That's simply not going to work, and it puts a burden both on the host country, but also in terms of the dangers that illegal migrants face on the way to Europe. So what we want to do is tackle that, and Bangladesh has made huge progress in tracking down and helping Bangladeshis who are illegally in Europe to return. We have what we call in our jargon standard operating procedures, and we're very pleased that progress has been made on these returns. But the flip side is we need to encourage legal migration, and Europe is an aging society. Our young people are dwindling, and we need people from Bangladesh with the appropriate skills to help our societies. And that should be something that is of benefit to both sides. So, Bangladeshis would go to Europe, have a decent wage, decent working conditions there, learn things, but bring their skills to Europe, and then return to Bangladesh after a few years. And that's what we're calling the talent partnership, which at the moment is identifying which sectors might be the best for this kind of bringing of labour to Europe. And there are other countries already doing this. We know that Bangladesh has a very good reputation for its remittance workers who go legally abroad to the Middle East and elsewhere. And I think we want to have that kind of relationship where talents and suitably qualified people can come to Europe, enrich us, and in return be enriched. So that would be a very positive thing for our relations.
I want to end the show with the positive note. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
থ্যাংক ইউ সো মাচ। দর্শক, আমরা কথা বলছিলাম বাংলাদেশে ইউ প্রধান চার্লস ওয়াটলির সাথে। তিনি আশা প্রকাশ করেন যে আগামী দিনে বাংলাদেশকে এগিয়ে নিয়ে যেতে পারবে সেসব তরুণরা যারা বাংলাদেশ থেকে নিজের দক্ষতা প্রমাণ করে ইউরোপীয় ইউনিয়নে কাজ করতে যেতে পারেন এবং তার মাধ্যমে তারা যে রেমিটেন্স সেটি পাঠালে বাংলাদেশ আরও উপকৃত হবে। দেখা হবে মুখোমুখির অন্য কোনো পর্বে অন্য কোনো কিছুর সাথে। তার আগ পর্যন্ত ভালো থাকুন, সুস্থ থাকুন।